Good evening, everybody. David Fierstein, Powercall Emergency Sirens, working on the Hornblaster 224 Nightmare Edition train horns. In the previous video I did today, I did a video on how to install the train horn kit together, so you could basically see how everything goes together and you understood the components of where everything went, because the instructions are so kind of vague. So it's late at night. I wanted to work on the wiring. The wiring for this system is really easy. I wanted to just go over it as part 2 of this video to help you understand better how to install your Nightmare Edition train horn from Hornblasters. So what you've got here is the Nightmare with the spare tire delete. We've gone over this earlier today. We did about a 30-minute video showing you how to install everything, and I'm going to go over a couple wiring things here. So what I've got here is I put this on myself. This is the quick air release solenoid. So basically, instead of having the little valve underneath where you can drain the tank, I've got this, which is an addition from Hornblaster, that goes down to the bottom. You can see it's right there. So what's going to happen is when I want to drain my tank, instead of, if water builds up in your tank, it starts to get rusty, air stays in there, I'll basically be able to hit a momentary button which will activate this solenoid, which will release the air coming out of that hole. So in order to do that, you have to wire power and ground to activate this solenoid. On the other side, you've got the actual solenoid, excuse the mess here, you've got the other solenoid that actually activates the train horn. Once this gets power and ground, it will release this solenoid, which releases the air from the tank, and it goes into the lines and activates the horns. That requires power and ground also. And then you've got your pressure switch right here, which is mounted, as you can see on the side of my tank there. That has this wiring harness that comes out as well. It has a white wire, it has a black wire, it has a blue wire, and it has a red wire. So the instructions are a little vague, so I wanted to go over what I personally do. Now, remember that everybody does things differently. There's a lot of YouTube videos about this kit, about how it's wired, and you want to be really careful about how you wire this, what you wire it to. I've been in automotive electronics for about 27 years. I'm blessed to know what I know. So I just wanted to show you what my recommendation is for you guys when you are wiring this kit. So everything requires power and ground. Standard electronics, you need 12 volts, you need a good solid ground source. Remember, when you're grounding something that's this powerful, you've got the main ground wire that comes off of the compressor, okay? Or I'm sorry, off of the, not the compressor, off of the pressure switch. Let's try that again. You've got the ground that comes off the compressor. You've got the ground that comes off the pressure switch. You've got one of these 2 wires for your air release that needs ground, and then you've got one of the wires on your solenoid that needs ground. You can easily join all those together into one ground wire without any problems whatsoever. So what I've started doing is I have started joining these together. I am very picky when it comes to how my wiring looks. I like it to look professional and look nice. So what you're going to eventually see is I'm going to eventually tape these up so you don't see all these wires. I'm also not a big fan of crimp connectors. You can see crimp connectors right here. Yes, they make things really easy to install. But if you know anything about automotive electronics and the environment, eventually water, dirt, grime, snow, sleet, whatever is going to get on these terminals. And down the road, these terminals are going to start to degrade, and they're going to start to rust, and they're going to lose connection, and eventually something on your system isn't going to work because a connector has lost its connection or it wasn't crimped well. My recommendation, and this is just my personal recommendation, is to cut these connectors off, take a soldering iron, and solder your connections together so you are guaranteed to have a perfect connection every time. That is what I've started to do here. I've taken the ground wire out of the compressor, I've taken the ground wire from the pressure switch, and I have created an area here that I have soldered. I'm not done soldering yet. When you take a section of this wire, a lot of people have a tendency to take their crimpers, they take it, and then they push really, really hard, and they make a big gap. Eventually, that gap is just going to come back because it's not made. So what I do is I take a bite out of there, I take a bite out of there, I take my razor blade, and I cut that whole section out so the wire is bare. That's actually a really good solder joint, but I've missed a little bit there, so I'm going to add some more solder to that. If you solder all your wires, you can put heat wrap over that, heat shrink over that, or you can use just standard electrical tape as long as you know what you're doing. That will be just fine for your connections. So as this comes down, I'm now going to add one of these wires to that ground, and then I'm going to take one of the ground wires here, I'm going to run it through the system here, and I'm going to ground, and I'm going to add it to this ground as well. So when all is said and done, I'm going to have this one heavy gauge ground wire that comes off the compressor. It's got a really good ring terminal, and as you can see here, they have shrink wrapped that connection, which is the way all connectors should be, which means it's probably soldered and then it's shrink wrapped. My recommendation is cut these connectors off, because over time they are what are going to make your system stop working. They get caught in dirt and snow and crap, and they lose connection or they rust. It's just better to cut them off and solder them together. So the white wire that comes off your pressure switch, again, the instructions are very vague. The white wire that comes off the pressure switch has a note on it, and it says goes to compressor, okay, which it just fell off. So the white wire goes to the red wire of your compressor, okay? And then you've got your black wire, which goes to ground. You've got your red wire, which is going to go to power. Now again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this off, and I'm going to solder it directly on here, and then run my power wire. Remember, when you're wiring this, you see the size of this wire, okay? What you don't want to do is find a piece of wire that's like this size and add it to that. Remember, if it's a big thick wire, you need to extend it with a big thick wire. You do not want to take an 18 gauge wire and attach it to a 14 gauge wire. It needs that kind of power. If you do that, you're going to find that your wire is going to get super, super hot because it's just trying to pull too much. So I will eventually, when I'm done, have my power and my ground. And then you have your blue wire, which needs to go to a switched source on your vehicle. If any of you know anything about your vehicles, when you turn your key on, you get ignition power. You need to find something in your fuse block or in your vehicle on your ignition switch that gives you switched power. You can find a fuse and tap into that fuse, but common sense electronics for automotive vehicles says when they built the vehicle, they didn't build it so you can take a fuse out and jam a connector into it, okay? You can do that if you want to do that, but the best thing is to find a wire coming off your ignition for your switched source that comes on hot when you turn your key on. That way you don't worry about messing your fuse block up, you don't worry about fuses blowing and stuff jammed into your fuse box. Common normal sense electronics for an automotive vehicle means you don't mess with your fuse block. It's there for a reason. You're pulling more out of that fuse than it's meant to be rated for. So find an ignition switched source on your key, ignition key coming down, and find that wire as well. Okay? So again, when everything is all said and done, I'm going to have one ground wire hooked to everything. So then I'm going to have one of these left. So basically, this requires power and ground. It will already have its ground, so I can have two choices here. My personal preference has always been is when you have a switch, is to put ground on that switch. That way, if for some reason that switch grounds out for some reason, you're not going to pop a fuse. I'd rather interrupt a ground than I would interrupt a power source. So, but everybody is different. So for now, I'm going to go on their recommendation because they, in their instructions, and the tech support guy said you want to ground everything. So I'm going to ground everything here. And I think that's probably better, honestly, now that I think about it, because this is going to be outside of the vehicle and you've got power wires that are live outside of the vehicle. I think it's probably better to do it that way. So I will ground the one wire, and then the other wire has to go to the switch, which will give it power. So every time I activate that switch, one side of the switch will go to power, the other side will go to this wire, and every time I push the button, it'll activate this. Same thing with your horn switch. When you give one of these, has to get ground, and then your switch will give you power. And then every time you activate that switch, it's going to open up that solenoid, which is going to release air out of the system and into there. So when all is said and done, I'm going to have my power wire, I'm going to have my ground wire, and then I'm going to have 2 wires going up to the front of the vehicle. 3 wires, basically. My power wire, wherever you happen to run that, I'm going to run it out to my battery with a fuse on the end. Absolutely make sure you put a fuse on the end of this wire. The kit comes with a fusible link, and you want to use it. The big classic moving mistake is people like to run power, and they forget to put a fusible link in. That is a bad idea. Please make sure that you put that fusible link in. You look at the fuse that they put in there that's rated for this type of system, and make sure that you put the right fusible link in there. So I'll have a number of wires going up front. I'll have my power wire, I'll have my ignition wire, I'll have 1 wire from here and 1 wire from there going up front. Everything else will be good. My recommendation again, when you run these wires, again, normal automotive electronics says don't run bare wires underneath the frame of your vehicle. Go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's, go to an automotive store and find some black loom. Run all your wires in loom, and every little bit around that loom area, make sure you put a piece of black tape like every foot or so. That way, if for some reason the wire tries to come out of the loom, it will not. So run that loom up wherever it is in your vehicle. Make sure you tie that loom up. One of the really good things that I use when I install loom is these. These are those clips. You can put your loom in that clip, and then you can screw it up to the body of your vehicle. That way your loom is guaranteed to not come down. Even if you wire tie it up, you can wire tie it up, but these hold them up better. You can find all that stuff at Home Depot. So make sure that your loom is ran all the way to wherever you have to go. If you're going through the firewall of your vehicle, make sure it's not metal against the wire. Make sure you go through a grommet or some sort of protected area and loom all of your wire. Okay? The switches that come with this kit are basic, boring switches. They will work, okay? But again, if you go to your local hardware store, go to your local Home Depot store, you can find really good switches for very, very inexpensive that look like this. They're very high quality switches that you can do. You can find momentary switches. You can find single on-off switches. Okay, this is one of the ones that I'm going to use. It's just a single pole, double throw switch. Okay, on and off. It's a good quality switch that's going to turn your compressor on and off. And then somewhere in here, which I don't know where, I've got momentary switches that do the same thing. I'm going to use 3 switches in my system. Okay, it comes with 2 to activate your solenoid and 1 to activate your horn. What I personally am going to do for my truck is I'm going to have 3 switches. I'm going to have 2 on-off switches. I'm going to have a momentary switch. And the reason I do that is for some reason I have a malfunction, or my kids are in the truck, or somebody comes in my truck and they want to flip things on. That one first switch is going to be main power for the whole thing. So if somebody comes in and they know Dave's got a horn there, they can flip that switch on and then wait for it to fill and hit the horn. I have a dead man switch, which will be mounted somewhere else to where power for that unit will be totally wiped out. So you can't use either one of those switches until you flip that dead man switch. It's like having a Cole Hersey switch in a fire truck. You can't turn anything until that main power is turned on. So that's what my plan is. I'll have a switch that will activate and deactivate power, and then I'll have the second switch which will turn on my compressor, and then I'll have a switch just like this, but it's a momentary switch that every time I hit it, it'll open up my air tank and blow the horns. So again, this is just personal preference. Just remember, when you're installing these, use common sense. Look at the parts that they give you. The switches will work just fine. There's no complaints with them. But if you go to Home Depot or a hardware store, you can find some really good high-quality switches that will work a lot better than the ones that come with the kit. It's just a personal preference from somebody that's been in automotive electronics a long time. So in closing, use common sense when you're doing your wiring. Don't use these connectors if you don't have to, because they degrade over time. Cut them off, strip it, use a soldering iron and solder them together, and you will never have a problem. That right there, you can see how cheapy that is. That is a recipe for disaster when it comes to weather and cold and rain. You do not want water and all that stuff to get in that connector. You can see how loose it is on the wire already. I can spin that connector on that wire and it'll come off, I guarantee you. So you want to cut those off, in my opinion, and solder everything. So I hope that helps explain the wiring to you. I'm going to do a number of videos on this system to try to help you and to help Hornblasters with their installations. after putting this together and trying to do it without assistance. It's just something that I feel like I need to do to help everybody who's trying to install this, to let you know it's really not difficult, but you want to use some knowledge from some people that have done this in the past so it's done right to avoid any problems. I literally just watched a YouTube video of a guy that installed this, and all his wiring underneath his spare tire area was butt connector after Scotch lock after butt connector, and boy oh boy, that's a disaster. Scotch locks should be outlawed. They are just the most horrible thing in the world. Scotch locks, butt connectors, you want to make sure you solder as much as you can. That way you're guaranteed a perfect installation. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Share it with your Hornblaster friends. I've been talking to Alex with Hornblasters, telling him that I will do everything I can to help you guys with the installation of the Nightmare 224, 244, 224 kit with the spare tire delete. It's supposed to be frosty tonight, frost warning. In May, it's a frost warning. What in the hell? It's usually 80 degrees outside. So we have a frost warning tonight in Virginia. God, I have no idea why that's going on. But my plan is to try to get this installed this weekend, because we're going to do some birthday party drive-bys because of the COVID, and I want to blast my guys out. So that is the second part of my video. The third part of my video will be showing you how it goes in the spare tire area, how it mounts up. We don't know how everything's going to go in, so once that happens, we'll get you on another video. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a message on YouTube. I'll be happy to answer it. I've become very familiar with this whole kit, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. And remember, Hornblasters has tech support Monday through Friday. Great bunch of guys. They'll do everything they can to help you. So hope this helped you out a little bit. We'll be back soon, and I hope you all take care. God bless you all. We'll be back soon. Take care.